Welcome to Highland Presbyterian Church and our Senior Life Institute program entitled Birds on the Brink. The Senior Life Institute is a program providing members of our congregation and the community at large with a new dimension of lifelong learning. Today we are excited to introduce Dan Mummert in a presentation entitled From the Brink.
Hello, I'm Dan Mummert, a wildlife diversity biologist with the Pennsylvania Game Commission. I'm the biologist that covers southeastern Pennsylvania, and my main focus for the Game Commission is all the birds and mammals that are considered species of conservation concern throughout Pennsylvania. So today, what I'll be talking about are some of the conservation work that we're doing for birds throughout Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, there's a tremendous diversity of birds. We have a great diversity of habitat. So like in the north central part of the state, we have huge expanses of woodland habitat that are unbroken. So we have birds that specialize in this habitat type. In the northwestern part of the state, we have some of our largest wetlands. So we have sandhill cranes, we have rails, we have grebes, all kinds of birds associated with wetland habitat. Here in southeastern Pennsylvania, we have a good mixture of habitat with agriculture, wooded areas, suburban areas, so good diversity here in the southeast part of Pennsylvania as well. But altogether, Pennsylvania has about 400 different species of birds, and about half of those, about 200 of those, actually stay here during the nesting season and raise young. So a certain group of all of our wildlife diversity, of our bird diversity, are the species that I focus on with my job as a wildlife diversity biologist. And those species are called the species of greatest conservation need, or you can also call them species of concern. And that's not a small group of birds. You know, out of those 400 that can be found here in the state, 79 of them are considered species of conservation concern. Now, there's several reasons as to why a bird is considered a species of conservation concern. Some of them are extremely rare and therefore considered either threatened or endangered. You know, threatened being fairly rare, endangered meaning almost completely gone from Pennsylvania, extremely rare in Pennsylvania. Out of those species that are considered threatened or endangered, 78% of them are associated with wetland habitats, so a large percentage of them. Other species are those that aren't considered either threatened or endangered yet, but are in steep decline, and others are called core population species. So some of those that are considered of serious decline, some of those are our grassland species, such as the eastern meadowlark here. The eastern meadowlark has declined precipitously since the 1970s until today, and you can see here in the graph how quickly they've declined. And a lot of the reason for that is because we're losing so much of the habitat, or the grassland habitat, that they require. And there's a number of other species that are species of concern that are also in serious decline like this. Other species that are species of conservation concern are fairly common in the state, but they're considered species of conservation concern species because a large percentage of their population nests and breeds here in Pennsylvania. So for example, the scarlet tanager, 17% of the entire world's population of scarlet tanagers are found nesting here in Pennsylvania. So we have an extreme reason to focus on making sure that these species continue to do well here in this state. Wood thrush, you know, shown here in this picture, 8.5% of the entire world's population of wood thrush are found here in Pennsylvania. So, you know, out of all these species of concern and really our diversity of wildlife in general, where are they? You know, where can they be found in Pennsylvania? Are they in, you know, are they only on state managed lands, or where are they? Well, Pennsylvania is comprised of 28 million acres of land altogether. 24 million acres of that is privately owned by folks like you and me. So that's, you know, altogether 85% of Pennsylvania is owned by the general public. Therefore, you know, what we do on our lands is really going to have a huge impact on our entire diversity of wildlife. You know, the fate of our wildlife is dependent upon how we manage our lands. So because of this, the Game Commission, the Pennsylvania Game Commission, which is in charge of all the wild birds and wild mammals of Pennsylvania, in 2005, created this new position of biologists called the Wildlife Diversity Biologists. There's 6 of us. Most of us have about 12 or 13 different counties that we work in and that we're kind of in charge of. And our main focus with these positions are helping in the conservation of these species of conservation concern. Next. And one of the ways that we do this, one of our main programs that we help in the conservation of wildlife is through this program called the Private Landowner Assistance Program, or PLAP for short. And this is something that a lot of the general public can get involved in if they're interested. For anyone who owns at least 10 acres of land, what they can do is they can contact the wildlife diversity biologists for their region. So if you're in southeastern Pennsylvania, that would be me, you would contact me, and we would actually schedule a day for me to come out to your property, and we would walk around the property and I would consult and talk about all the different things that could be done to further enhance your property for a great diversity of wildlife, and especially emphasizing some of these species of conservation concern. So this is the site consult part of it, and we have this discussion, and then afterwards, when I get back to my office, I actually write up a management plan with all of my recommendations for how you can improve your property for wildlife, for a great diversity of wildlife. Next. This is a free program. So really, anyone who has an interest in doing this and has at least 10 acres, feel free to contact me and we'll go through this program. Since this program started in 2005, the 6 of us wildlife diversity biologists have consulted 1,739 different landowners throughout Pennsylvania with a combined total of 282,000 acres of land, that's providing recommendations on how they can better manage these properties for wildlife. So it's having, hopefully having a good impact on helping people provide better wildlife for Pennsylvania's wildlife throughout the state. Now, another program that we wildlife diversity biologists are working on is for another a species of conservation concern called the barn owl. And the program is called the Barn Owl Conservation Initiative. Now, barn owls are one of 8 different species of owls that we have here in Pennsylvania. They can be identified by they're light in color, so almost like a white to cream colored. They have a heart-shaped flat facial disc, that's different from a lot of the other birds in Pennsylvania. They have dark eyes, not those big golden yellow eyes that great horned owls have. And really distinguishing them from the other owls here in Pennsylvania is that they have a spotted front or spotted breast, and the other owls here in Pennsylvania have more of a streaked breast. So that's very different from the other owls here in Pennsylvania. And their song is this shrill hissing sound that's absolutely perfect for this time of year during Halloween. Not your typical hoot hoot sound of the great horned owl that we commonly hear. And barn owls they're found all over the world. They have one of the largest distributions of any bird throughout the world. There's 36 different subspecies of barn owls in the world, and they're found on every continent except for Antarctica. And you can see this graph here, or this map, shows their distribution throughout the world in green. So you can see that they're found, throughout much of the United States, almost all of the United States, South America, and pretty much anywhere, so long as it doesn't get too cold, so not too cold of a climate. So for example, you don't see them into northern Canada or Alaska. And if you look out in Asia, you don't see them north of the Himalaya Mountains. They are north of India. And you also don't find them in most arid of deserts. So if you look at the Sahara there in Africa, you can see that they're not found there. But they're found in many other parts of the world. Here in Pennsylvania, this is their main type of habitat. Throughout much of the world, this is their main type of habitat, is large expanses of grasslands. they prefer grasslands because their main prey is this rodent called the meadow vole. A single family of barn owls will eat about 2,500 meadow voles and other rodents such as mice and rats. They'll also eat shrews, but they'll eat about 2,500 of these rodents every single year. So they do an incredible job at helping control rodent populations, and they're really one of the farmers' best friends. But barn owls are in steep decline, here in Pennsylvania. And a large part of that is because we're losing habitat for barn owls. We're losing that grassland habitat that they need for their main prey, those meadow voles. So you can see here how grassland habitat has really been decreasing here in Pennsylvania over the decades. In 1940, for example, we had slightly over 2 million acres of land, of grazing land or pasture habitat here in the state. And you can see how quickly it's decreased over the decades. By 1982, we were down to only about 500,000 acres of this grassland habitat. And the last information that's come out from the Department of Ag was in 2012, and we were down as a state down to 118,000 acres of this grassland habitat. So that's a 94% decrease in this habitat type that barn owls and really a lot of other of our grassland birds need to survive. So other birds such as the American kestrel, grasshopper sparrows, northern harriers, meadowlarks, all these birds that require grassland habitat, and these birds are also in steep decline. Here's a graph showing that similar, how these grassland birds are declining as a group faster than any other type of bird, any other group of birds here in Pennsylvania. So grasshopper sparrows, they've declined by about 80%, since the 1960s. Eastern meadowlark, also declining by about 80% since the 1960s. And barn owls, the focus of this project that we're working on, have declined by about 50% just since the 1980s. So steep decline. So the Game Commission, in 2005, we started this project called the Barn Owl Conservation Initiative. And we had several main objectives that we were focusing on with this program. One was we wanted to learn more about how many barn owls are still in Pennsylvania and where they're found in Pennsylvania, and then monitoring their population over the years to see if some parts of the state are decreasing in population, other areas are increasing, and which areas are holding steady with their population. Another thing we wanted to do was improve habitat for barn owls. So improve the grassland habitat where they need a forage for meadow voles, and also improve the habitat where they nest. So they typically don't build a nest, but they often nest in barns or silos. And we've learned that putting up nest boxes is a great way to improve nesting habitat for these barn owls. And the last thing is just getting the word out to the public that barn owls, as well as other grassland birds and a lot of other species in Pennsylvania, are in serious decline, and what work is being done to help in their population. So the first thing we did with this Barn Owl Conservation Initiative was get the word out to the public that we were looking for information on where barn owls were nesting in Pennsylvania. And so we had articles in newspapers and local magazines, especially directing it to areas where there was a large amount of agriculture, where there was still grassland habitat where these barn owls would be found. So we got the word out to the public, and we started getting a lot of calls coming back. And farmers would be reaching out saying, hey, I think I have a nest of barn owls in my silo or my barn. Why don't you come check it out? And so I went to a number of these different sites, and sometimes, sometimes it ended up being, pigeons, or sometimes it was a great horned owl, so not the barn owl that we were looking for. But, cases like this, the farmer hands me a kind of a broken ladder and it says, hey, why don't you climb up the silo, and I think they're nesting up there. And so I climb up, and in this case, I actually did. I climbed up to the silo, top of the silo, and there was a barn owl with eggs up there at the top with young ones that had just hatched. And this happened in a whole number of instances where people directed us to where there was nesting barn owls. And since this time, since 2005, my counterparts and I, we've been able to confirm actual nesting barn owls at 239 different sites throughout Pennsylvania. And you can see here in this map where they're located. Now, the open rings, well, let's start with the rings. The dark black dots with the red rings around them were sites that were newly found this past year in 2020. The dark circles were active sites in 2020, and the open rings are sites that were not active this past year, but they were active in prior years of this study. So you can see here that barn owls have always tended to be concentrated in southeastern Pennsylvania, outside of the suburbs of Philadelphia, and really the central part of the state as well. We're just starting to find a couple new sites out in the western third of Pennsylvania, but barn owls have really declined in the state. You know, in the 1970s and 80s, barn owls were known to be in all corners of Pennsylvania, and so they seem to have really contracted their population. Now, another part of the study, another thing that we're working on, is putting up nest boxes for barn owls. And since we started this project, we've gotten about 210 barn owl boxes installed. And the purpose of this is to provide a really safe and secure nest site for barn owls, and also to provide a site that maybe there's not a barn or a silo where they might nest in, but there's great grassland habitat. So these barn owl boxes provide nesting sites in areas where there is good habitat. And one thing about this is volunteers have been key with these barn owl nest boxes. Almost all of the nest boxes that we've put out there, gotten out onto the landscape, were built by volunteers. Volunteers have also helped with the installation of nest boxes and helping to monitor the boxes to see if barn owls are using them. So if anyone has an interest in woodworking and in making barn owl boxes, or helping with monitoring some of these boxes, feel free to contact me. I'd love some help with this project. Now, with these nest boxes, they have proven to be successful. Typically, about 75% of the active nest sites, the nest sites that we're able to confirm each year, are in nesting boxes that we've put up. That's not to say that barn owls aren't nesting, in other locations. Barn owls are known to nest in tree cavities, for example, and there's no way that we can go out to every different tree cavity and search for nesting barn owls. But about 75% of the active sites that we found are in these nest boxes. So another thing we're doing to improve habitat for barn owls and really other species of wildlife as well is talking with people. So just communicating how to best manage their land, so maybe not putting chemicals down during the breeding season especially, maybe not mowing grassland habitat in the main part of the nesting season. And if there's areas that may not be suitable for farming, maybe putting that into a grassland type habitat. So maybe some areas that are too hilly or too wet. So instead of trying to farm those areas, maybe putting it into grassland, and that's going to benefit not only barn owls, but a whole host of other grassland species. So, and lastly, just getting the information out to the public that, this is a species of bird, these barn owls, that are really declining in population. And this is what we're doing to try to help them and try to help restore their population. If we can get people excited about barn owls and other wildlife, and especially kids, then they'll carry that energy forward and hopefully help conserve wildlife into the long-term future. So these kids, example here, they're just really excited about these species. Barn owls, if we can help barn owls, which require grassland habitat, if we can get people excited about barn owls, it's also going to benefit a whole lot of other species that require these grassland habitats. Some other projects that I'm working on and the Pennsylvania Game Commission is working on for species that are in serious decline include a very similar American Kestrel conservation initiative. The Kestrel is a small falcon that also uses grassland habitat, and we're also putting up nest boxes for these birds. We also determine where they're nesting each year, banding the nestlings, and learning more about their habitat requirements. We're also doing a good number of different surveys for a lot of these species of conservation concern. One thing we do are every spring during the nesting season, we go to a number of the different state game lands that we manage, and we record and do surveys figuring out all the different species of birds that use these state game lands and how many of each species are using them. And then doing this each year to see if our management strategies are helping, bird species, or if some bird species are being negatively impacted. So that's one thing we're doing. Another thing we're surveying are what are called rookeries. So some birds, like great blue heron here, nest in these concentrations where you have like a large tree like this. This is a large sycamore. And this tree actually had about 35 great blue heron nests in it. And they nest here in this tree every year. And so we monitor these rookeries every year to see how their population is doing. We also monitor all the different eagle nests each year throughout the state to see how eagles are doing. We also monitor all the different osprey nests that we know of each year. And we also, once every 5 years, we also go to some of the largest wetlands in Pennsylvania, and we do what are called callback surveys, where we play the different songs of a lot of the different wetland bird species and see if they call back. So it's a call response survey, and that's the best way to survey some of these birds that are very secretive and in these large marsh complexes. And one of the last surveys we do for species of concern are woodcock surveys. So each year in the spring, we travel these routes and we search for woodcock in those areas. So more importantly than what I do and what the Game Commission is doing is what can you do for wildlife? What can you do on your property and in the community to help in the conservation of our declining birds? Well, first of all, like I mentioned, how 85% of Pennsylvania is owned by people like you and me. It's owned by the general public. So it's important to know what you can do at your own house and help birds on your own property. One of the best things you can do is plant native trees and native shrubs that are going to provide food and cover for wildlife. And there's a great diversity of trees and shrubs that you can choose from. Staghorn sumac, for example, is one of my favorite small trees. It provides food. I've actually seen woodpeckers in the middle of winter sitting on top of those red cones of fruit from a sumac tree because they produce their fruit late in the season. Oak trees are another example. Hickory, black gum, apple trees, crabapple trees. These are all different species of trees and shrubs that will provide a diversity of food for your local wildlife. Another thing to consider, if you only have deciduous trees on your property, consider planting some evergreens, maybe some conifers that after all the deciduous trees have dropped their leaves, conifers still provide great cover habitat because they hold their needles. So if it's terrible weather, if it's snowing and sleeting, wildlife can use those conifers for cover habitat and get out of that harsh climate, that harsh weather. So for example, some of the native conifers that you could plant on your property include white pine, Virginia pine, or red cedar. And not just planting 1 or 2 trees in an area, but if you can plant a large clump of conifers, that provides superb cover habitat for wildlife. A third thing you can do on your property is removing non-native exotic plants. So Japanese stiltgrass, for example, multiflora rose, bush honeysuckle, Japanese honeysuckle, ailanthus, which is also called tree of heaven. And tree of heaven is one of the main plants that spotted lanternflies are attracted to. So if you can remove these exotics and focus on providing native trees and shrubs on your property, that'll do a huge service for the local wildlife. Last thing to consider is, or one other thing to consider, is that dead wood, wood like standing dead trees, which are called snags, or if you have a wooded area, allowing for limbs and branches to lay on the ground. But all this dead wood is actually really good for wildlife. Those large snags, standing dead trees, as long as it's not a safety hazard, or as long as it's not going to potentially fall over on the house or anything like that, they provide exceptional habitat for wildlife in that they can provide large cavities for woodpeckers and other birds. The bark that sloughs off, there's often lots of insects underneath that sloughing off bark, which is a great food resource for wildlife. And brush piles, like you can see here in the picture, provide great cover habitat for wildlife, especially during the wintertime. Another thing you can do is if you have grassland habitat, such as maybe at least an acre of grassland, or if you know of an area locally that has good grassland habitat, consider building some bluebird boxes and putting those up. With bluebird boxes, you just want to make sure that if you put up these nest boxes that you monitor them through the breeding season. And the main reason for monitoring is to make sure that this exotic species of bird called the house sparrow doesn't use them. But you'll get either bluebirds or some other native species of birds using these boxes, such as chickadees, tree swallows, house wrens, Carolina wrens. But this is a great thing to do on your property. Another thing you can do if you want to benefit species of conservation concerned birds would be get involved in this other program we're doing called the Kestrel Conservation Initiative. And with this is very similar to the barn owl program, where one of the things we're doing is installing nest boxes throughout southeastern Pennsylvania and monitoring those boxes to see how many of them are being used by kestrels and how many young ones they have each year. And this is a great way to study how the population of kestrels is doing in Pennsylvania. Kestrels is another one of those grassland bird species that are in decline, and they're a species of conservation concern. So this is why we're putting a lot of focus on these birds. But I've had volunteers now. We now have close to 300 nest boxes in place throughout southeastern Pennsylvania that are being monitored, and I'm looking for volunteers to help with this project. Volunteers have made almost all of these nest boxes, so I'm constantly looking for more help in helping make these nest boxes. And I also have a lot of monitors helping with or a lot of volunteers helping with the monitoring of these boxes. All these boxes get checked about every other week throughout the entire nesting season through the spring. So that takes a lot of volunteer help. So if that's something you're interested in, please feel free to contact me. If you're interested in birds and wanting to know more about birds and what can be done to help in bird conservation, there's a lot of great groups in the area that are focused on bird conservation and bird identification and just enjoying getting out into nature and seeing birds. These local bird clubs often have monthly meetings where they have either speakers come in and talk about different conservation programs that they're working on, or doing slideshows on places that they visited and what birds they've seen. These bird clubs also do a lot of field trips each year, going to different places where bird populations are doing well and seeing a great diversity of birds. Locally, here's the main bird clubs that we have include the Lancaster County Bird Club, which meets in Lancaster each month. We have Baird Ornithological Club, which is in Berks County. We have the Westchester Bird Club, of course, in Chester County, and the Quadrupedala Audubon Society, which is based in Lebanon County. So I'd highly recommend, if you're interested in birds and learning more about birds, that you contact these clubs. If anyone wants information about that, feel free to contact me, or I think they each have websites available too with more information. Some great sites on the internet for more information about bird conservation and species of concern. If you get interested in putting up bluebird boxes and learning more about bluebirds, the North American Bluebird Society has an exceptional website with all kinds of information about bluebirds and how to install nest boxes and plans for how to build them. Another great agency, with, of course, the one that I work for is the Pennsylvania Game Commission, and we have a website with lots of great information about where in the state these different species of conservation concern are located and what's being done to help in their conservation. eBird is another great source of information. eBird is actually, it's almost like a mapping system where if you want to learn about where and what time of year different species of birds are found, throughout either Pennsylvania or really anywhere in the world, you can get on their website and it shows you how many of each different species is found at different areas during different times of year. And you can also use eBird to record your own bird observations. So it's a great tool to have. And then the Cornell Lab of Ornithology has a great website also, with all kinds of information about every different species of birds throughout Pennsylvania and North America in general. And it also has information about some of the different volunteer citizen science projects that you can get involved in yourself, such as Project Feeder Watch, which you put up a bird feeder on your property and you record all the different species of birds that you see every day. And then you provide that information to Cornell, and that gets put into a large database that helps with information about the population size for every different species throughout North America. So thank you very much for joining us today for this information about some of the conservation work that the Pennsylvania Game Commission is doing to help our serious declining birds here in Pennsylvania, and information about how you can get involved and how you can volunteer for some of these projects and how you can join some of these local bird clubs and learn more about birds and their conservation. So with that, thank you very much.